For 300 years, humanity had been the galaxy's greatest disappointment. When the conquered of 12 empires first discovered Earth in the year 2247, they expected to find something useful, perhaps a warrior species they could recruit into their endless wars, perhaps a primitive civilization they could absorb and use for labor. What they found instead confused them deeply. They found humans, a species that smiled when insulted, a species that negotiated when threatened, a species that responded to violence with sanctions and trade restrictions instead of weapons. The Dominion, a proud empire of reptilian warriors, called humans grass-eaters. It was their worst insult. The hegemony, whose insect-like soldiers had conquered 100 worlds, used humanity as a joke. When children misbehaved, their parents would say, "Act like a warrior, not like a human." The collective had even enslaved 3 human colony worlds. They had simply arrived with their fleet, demanded surrender, and taken every human on those planets as property. And humanity's response had been to file a formal complaint with the conquered council. A formal complaint, nothing more. Ambassador had represented Earth on conquered station for 15 years. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes. Every day, she walked through corridors where alien species twice her size laughed at her. Every day, she sat in meetings where her voice was ignored. Every day, she smiled and bowed and said thank you to creatures who saw her people as nothing more than clever animals. Today, she sat in her small office and read the reports that had arrived from the frontier. A human cargo ship had been destroyed near space. The Dominion claimed it had wandered into a military exercise. All 40 crew members were dead. The conquered council had ruled it an accident. A human mining colony had petitioned for protection against raiders. The petition had been, the colony had been raided 3 times in the past year. 17 people were dead and 50 more were missing. And now, the worst news of all. New Taipei, a beautiful world of green mountains and silver cities, home to 2 billion human souls, families, children, artists and farmers and teachers and dreamers. The hegemony had demanded that New Taipei pay tribute. The colony's governor had refused, citing human sovereignty under conquered law. The hegemony had responded by sending a fleet. They had not invaded, they had not conquered, they had simply positioned their ships in orbit and fired. 2 billion people, gone in less than an hour. The planet's surface was now nothing but glass and ash. When asked to explain their actions, the High Commander had simply said, "They failed to show proper deference. Let this be a lesson to all humans." Ambassador read the report 3 times. Her hands did not shake. Her face did not change. She had trained herself long ago to show nothing. In this galaxy, showing emotion was showing weakness, and humans could not afford to look any weaker than they already did. But inside her chest, something cold and ancient was waking up. She thought about what she was about to do. She thought about the promises humanity had made to itself. She thought about 300 years of patience, of restraint, of choosing peace even when peace meant humiliation. And she thought about 2 billion people who had trusted that peace would protect them. She opened a secure channel, the most secure channel that existed, a communication line that connected to a facility beneath the surface of Mars, a facility that appeared on no maps, a facility whose workers had been declared legally dead so that no one could ever question them, a facility that every human leader hoped would never be used. Project Longinus. Most humans did not know it existed. Those who did tried not to think about it. It was humanity's darkest secret and greatest shame. A weapon so terrible that the people who built it had immediately locked it away and sworn to never use it. Because humans understood something that the galaxy did not. They understood why humanity had chosen to be peaceful. It was not because humans were weak. It was not because humans were cowardly. It was not because humans lacked the ability to fight. It was because humans remembered what they were. Before first contact, before the conquered, before humanity reached the stars, there had been the last Earth War, a conflict so devastating that it had nearly ended the human species entirely. In 14 seconds, Project Longinus had ended that war. One shot, one weapon, millions dead. Humans had looked at what they had created. They had looked at the crater where a city used to be, and they had felt something that no other species in the galaxy seemed to feel. Horror, shame, guilt. They had sworn to never be that species again. They had locked away their weapons and chosen peace, not because they were grass eaters, but because they were recovering monsters. Ambassador typed 4 words into the secure channel. Her fingers were steady, her heart was not. The message read, Authorization Omega, activate Longinus. She added one more line before sending, May God forgive us. Somewhere beneath Mars, ancient systems began to wake. Lights flickered on in corridors that had been dark for a century. Engineers who had spent their entire careers hopping this moment would never come receive their orders. Humanity had tried peace. For 300 years they had tried. The galaxy had answered with the deaths of 2 billion innocent people. Now the galaxy would learn why humans had been so afraid of themselves. Now the galaxy would learn what happened when you woke the sleeping monster. Now the galaxy would hear the sound that humanity had hoped would never be heard again. General had spent 40 years hopping this day would never come. He was an old man now. His hair was white and his face was lined with age. He had joined Project Longinus as a young officer, full of pride and purpose. Back then, he had believed the weapon would never be fired. It was just a deterrent, his commanders had told him, just a reminder of what humanity could do if pushed too far. But deterrents only work if someone knows about them, and humanity had kept Longinus secret from the galaxy. Now he stood in the control center, deep beneath the red surface of Mars. Around him, officers sat at their stations. Some of them were crying. Others stared at their screens with empty eyes. They had all trained for this moment. They had all prayed it was just training. The facility hummed with power. Systems that had slept for 100 years were coming alive. The grate, buried in a chamber so large it could hold a small city, was warming up. Looked at the weapon specifications on his screen. He had memorized them long ago, but he read them again anyway. Perhaps he was hopping the numbers had changed. Perhaps he was hopping it was all a bad dream. There was not like other weapons. Other species had built planet killers before. They had their plasma bombs. They had their gravity crushers. Such weapons were terrible, but they were understandable. Longinus was something else entirely. Human scientists had discovered something strange about the universe. They had found that space itself was layered, like the pages of a book. Normal space sat on top of something called subspace, and subspace connected everything in the galaxy. When ships traveled faster than light, they were actually moving through subspace. This projectile did not simply fly through normal space. It was phase-locked, which meant it existed partially in subspace at the same time. When it hit its target, the destruction would echo through both layers of reality. Every species in the galaxy used subspace for communication and travel. Every empire had thousands of FTL beacons scattered across their territory. When Longinus fired, the shockwave would travel through subspace and hit every single one of those beacons. The entire galaxy would feel it. Every empire would know that something had changed. "General," said Lieutenant, a young woman with red eyes from crying. "Target confirmation requested." Looked at the target data. Prime, the throne world of the hegemony, home to their high commander, their ruling council, and 8 billion of their people. 8 billion, almost the same number as the human population of Earth. He thought about New Taipei. He thought about the images he had seen, the cities burning, the oceans boiling, the mountains melting into rivers of fire. 2 billion humans dead because they had refused to bow. He thought about the children. There had been so many children on New Taipei, schools and playgrounds and families eating dinner together, all of them gone in less than an hour. They had not warned them. They had not given them time to evacuate. They had simply fired and watched the world burn. "Target confirmed," said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Hollow, dead." "Sir," said another officer, Commander Wright. He was an older man, nearly as old as. His hands were shaking. "Are we sure about this? Once we fire, we cannot take it back. We will become what we swore we would never be again." Closed his eyes. He remembered the history lessons from his childhood. The last Earth War. The city of New Shanghai, population 12 million, erased in 14 seconds. The horror that followed, the trials, the tears, the promises. Never again, humanity had said. We will never be monsters again. "They killed 2 billion of our people," said quietly. "They laughed while they did it. They called it a lesson." He opened his eyes. "What choice do they leave us?" No one answered. There was no answer to give. The weapon was fully charged now. The targeting systems were locked. All that remained was the order. Thought about his daughter. She lived on Earth with her own children. She did not know about Project Longinus. She did not know what her father really did. She thought he worked in asteroid mining administration. What would she think of him after today? What would his think? What would humanity think of itself? For 300 years, said, speaking to his officers but also speaking to himself, we chose mercy. We chose peace. We let them call us weak. We let them enslave our people. We let them laugh at us, because we knew what we were capable of. We knew what lived inside us. He took a deep breath. They did not believe us when we warned them. They did not listen when we begged them to stop. They thought our mercy was weakness. They thought our peace was fear. He placed his hand on the firing control. Let them learn the truth. Lieutenant was sobbing openly now. Commander Wright had closed his eyes and was moving his lips in silent prayer. Spoke the word that would change the galaxy forever. Fire. The facility shook. The lights flickered. Deep in the chamber below, something vast and terrible awakened and reached out across the stars. The projectile left Mars at nearly the speed of light. It carried with it the weight of 300 years of patience, 300 years of insults, 300 years of hope that peace could be enough. And it carried the anger of a species that had finally remembered what it was. The projectile was invisible. It moved so fast that light itself could barely keep up. One moment there was empty space. The next moment there was death. Prime was a beautiful world. It had purple oceans and mountains that glowed with natural crystal formations. The people had lived there for 10,000 years. They had built great cities of black stone and silver metal. They had created art and music and poetry. They had also created an empire built on conquest and cruelty, but they did not think of themselves as cruel. They thought of themselves as strong. They thought strength was the only thing that mattered. High Commander was in his palace when the projectile arrived. He was eating his evening meal and laughing with his advisors about the human response to the destruction of New Taipei. The humans had sent another formal complaint to the conquered council, another piece of paper with angry words and no action. They are truly pathetic, said, his mandibles clicking with amusement. 2 billion dead, and all they do is write letters. Perhaps we should destroy another of their worlds just to see what they write next. His advisors laughed. They were still laughing when their world ended. There was no warning. There was no sound. There was simply a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns, and then Prime was gone. Not destroyed in the normal sense. Not broken into pieces or burned to ash. It was simply unmade. The planet, its 3 moons, and a large piece of the sun itself vanished into a hole in reality that burned white-hot for exactly 3 seconds before collapsing. 8 billion died in that moment. They did not have time to scream. They did not have time to pray. They simply stopped existing, as quickly and completely as the humans of New Taipei had stopped existing. But the physical destruction was only the beginning. The dimensional shockwave exploded outward through subspace. It moved faster than light, faster than thought, faster than anything had ever moved before. Within minutes, it had reached every corner of the galaxy. On the Emperor III was addressing his war council. They were discussing plans to expand into human territory. The humans were weak, the Emperor said. They would be easy to conquer. Perhaps the Dominion should claim some of their worlds before other empires did. He was in the middle of a sentence when every screen in the palace flickered and died. The lights went out. Emergency systems failed. For a moment, there was complete darkness. When the power returned, his admirals were staring at their sensors in horror. "What is it?" the Emperor demanded. "What happened?" "Prime," whispered Admiral Thorne, his scales turning pale with fear. "It is gone, the entire system, and the weapon's signature." He could not finish the sentence. "What about the weapon's signature?" "It is impossible. No species has this technology. No species should have this technology." The Admiral looked up at his Emperor with eyes full of terror. Except, apparently, the humans. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. The collective was a hive-mind species, billions of individuals connected through psionic networks. When the shockwave hit their networks, every single felt it as physical pain. Their queens screamed. Their workers collapsed. For a terrible moment, they all shared the same thought: something has changed forever. The Wisdom Keepers were perhaps the oldest species in the galaxy. They had watched civilizations rise and fall for 1,000,000 years. They rarely spoke. They never interfered. They simply observed and recorded. When the shockwave passed through their ancient halls, the eldest keeper opened his eyes for the first time in 10,000 years. He activated a communication channel that had not been used since before the Conquered existed. His voice, dry and cracked with age, spoke a single word that was heard on every frequency in the galaxy. Finally, on Concord Station, chaos erupted. Alien diplomats ran through corridors, screaming in a dozen different languages. Fleet commanders demanded answers that no one could give. Security forces tried to maintain order but failed completely. In the middle of it all, Ambassador stood calmly at her post. Alien officials rushed past her, shouting questions. What had happened? Who was responsible? Was it a natural disaster? A new enemy? A weapon? She said nothing. She simply stood and watched the panic with her calm, patient eyes. A diplomat grabbed her arm. "You," he shouted, his reptilian face twisted with fear. "What do you know about this? What have your people done?" Ambassador looked at him for a long moment. This was the same diplomat who had laughed at her last week, the same one who had called humans useful pets in a council meeting. "I know exactly what we have done," she said quietly, "and I know that we are not finished yet." Before he could respond, every screen on the station flickered to life. A human face appeared. General, looking older and sadder than any human the aliens had ever seen. "Attention," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "This is a message to all species of the Conquered of 12 empires. What you have just witnessed was not an accident. It was not a natural disaster. It was humanity." The station fell silent. Every alien stopped moving and stared at the screens. "We have tried peace for 300 years, continued. "Today, peace ended. Tomorrow, you will learn what we have been hiding." The transmission cut off. In the silence that followed, Ambassador finally allowed herself to smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone watching a long and terrible story finally reach its end. The shockwave was still spreading, not just through space, but through the minds of every species that had ever underestimated humanity. And they were only beginning to understand their mistake. 48 hours passed. The galaxy held its breath. The Conquered Council had tried to meet, but no one could agree on anything. Some species wanted to form an alliance against humanity. Others wanted to surrender immediately. Some refused to believe that humans were responsible at all. They argued and shouted and accused each other while their empires trembled with fear. Then the human fleet appeared. It did not come from Earth. It did not travel through normal space. One moment the sky was empty. The next moment, 3,000 warships hung in the darkness like steel stars. They appeared everywhere at once. 100 ships near the, 200 near the breeding grounds. Dozens more at every major space station, every critical trade route, every military base that mattered. The fleet had been hiding in dimensional pockets, folded into spaces between spaces. Human scientists had discovered how to create these pockets decades ago. They had used them to hide a navy that no one knew existed. For 300 years, while the galaxy laughed at human weakness, humanity had been building, waiting, preparing for the day when patience would no longer be enough. General's face appeared on every screen in the galaxy once again. He looked exhausted. He looked sad, but his voice was steady. For 300 years, he began, humanity chose peace. We endured your contempt. We endured your theft of our resources and your kidnapping of our people. We endured violence that would have made any other species go to war. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was harder. We did this because we remembered what we were. Before we reached the stars, we nearly destroyed ourselves. We created weapons that could end worlds. We used them on our own people. We learned the terrible cost of our own anger. Images appeared on screens across the galaxy. Old images from Earth's history, cities in flames, mushroom clouds rising, fields of the dead. The humans watching these images looked away in shame. The aliens watching them felt a cold fear beginning to grow in their hearts. We swore we would never be that species again, continued. We chose peace because we were afraid of ourselves. We hoped that if we showed mercy, others would learn mercy too. His face grew dark. The hegemony killed 2 billion human civilians. They bombed cities. They burned children. They laughed while they did it, and they called it a lesson. He leaned forward. Let their fate be our lesson to you. The is gone. Their fleet is destroyed. Their empire is finished. This is what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. The transmission paused. Across the galaxy, rulers and generals and ordinary citizens stared at their screens, waiting for what came next. We make the following demands, said. These are not requests. They are not negotiations. They are commands. First, all human slaves will be released immediately. Every human being held in bondage will be returned to human space within 30 days. On a dozen worlds, slave masters began unlocking chains before the sentence was finished. Second, all human territories will be recognized as sovereign. No species will enter human space without permission. No species will make any claim to human worlds or resources. Maps flickered on screens, showing human territory outlined in red. It was larger than most species had realized. Humans had quietly settled hundreds of worlds over the centuries. Third, any act of aggression against humanity will be met with response. We have demonstrated our capabilities. We will not demonstrate them again. The fleet shifted in space, weapons systems powering up just enough to be visible on sensors. Thousands of ships, each one carrying weapons derived from the same technology that had destroyed Prime. We did not want this, said, and for a moment his voice cracked with emotion. We did not want to be your predators. We wanted to be your friends. We wanted to build something beautiful together among the stars. He straightened. You taught us that friendship requires strength to protect it. You taught us that peace must be enforced by those willing to fight for it. You taught us that the galaxy does not reward kindness. His eyes seemed to look directly at every viewer, no matter which world they watched from. So be it. Humanity will be kind anyway. We will protect the weak. We will help those who need help. We will build a better galaxy than the one you created." His voice dropped to something almost like a whisper. "But if any empire thinks to test our resolve, remember Prime. Remember that for 300 years we held ourselves back. Remember that we have shown you only a fraction of what we can do." The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, the great powers made their decisions quickly. The Emperor ordered his fleet to retreat from human space within the hour. He issued a formal apology for 3 centuries of insults and offered trade agreements more generous than any the Dominion had ever made. The Collective released every human slave in their territory before the day ended. Their queens sent messages of peace, promising to never again threaten human worlds. One by one, the empires that had built their power on arrogance and cruelty discovered the truth they had been too blind to see. Humans had never been prey. They had been the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, pretending to be harmless because they were afraid of their own teeth. Now their teeth were bared, and the galaxy would never forget the sight. 1 year later, the galaxy was a different place. The conquered of 12 had become the conquered of 13. Humanity held a permanent seat on the council, with the power to reject any decision. No one had argued against this. No one had dared. But the change was deeper than politics. It was a change in how every species thought about themselves and their place among the stars. In the months after the firing of Longinus, aliens had finally done what they should have done 300 years ago. They had studied humanity. They had read human history. They had watched human movies and listened to human music and examined human art. What they found terrified them. Humans had invented nuclear weapons before they could travel between planets. They had created biological weapons that could destroy entire species. They had built artificial intelligence and then worried that it might destroy them. They had even found ways to change the genetic code of life itself. And they had used these inventions on each other. The wars of human history were unlike anything the galaxy had seen, not because humans were more violent than other species. Many species were violent, but humans were violent in ways that showed terrifying creativity. They did not simply fight. They invented new ways to fight. They improved their weapons constantly. They turned science itself into a weapon. The last Earth War had killed hundreds of millions in a single day. Humanity had pushed itself to the edge of extinction, and then, somehow, they had stopped. They had looked at what they were capable of and felt horror. This was what made humans different. Other species conquered and killed without guilt. They saw strength as its own justification. Humans knew they were strong. They also knew that strength without wisdom was simply destruction. So they had chosen wisdom. They had locked away their weapons. They had practiced peace until it became habit. They had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that the galaxy would learn the same lesson. It had taken the death of 10 billion people to prove them wrong. Ambassador was now Chancellor, the highest diplomatic position in human government. She stood before the new conquered assembly in a hall that had been rebuilt and expanded to include the human delegation. The alien representatives watched her with a mixture of respect and fear. A year ago they had ignored her. A year ago they had laughed at her people. Now they hung on her every word. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice calm and measured as always. "Humanity did not want power. We did not want to be feared. We wanted peace. True peace built on mutual respect and cooperation." She paused and looked around the assembly. "We learned a painful lesson last year. Peace cannot exist without the strength to defend it. Kindness means nothing if the kind are not willing to protect themselves. We were kind. We were peaceful. And 2 billion of our people paid for that peace with their lives." Her voice hardened slightly. "We will not make that mistake again." The assembly was silent. Every alien present remembered the images of Prime vanishing into white fire. They remembered the human fleet appearing from nowhere. They remembered how quickly their empires had bent to human demands. But we will also not become what you were, continued. We will not build an empire of fear. We will not enslave or conquer or exploit. That is not who we want to be. She smiled. It was a small smile, almost sad. Humanity will be gardeners. Do you understand what I mean by this? Most of the aliens looked confused. Gardening was not a concept that meant much to species who had never valued growing things for their own sake. A gardener protects, explained. A gardener helps things grow. A gardener removes weeds and pests that would destroy the garden. A gardener does not own the plants. The gardener serves the garden, not the other way around. She spread her hands. This is what we offer. Protection for species too weak to protect themselves. Aid for worlds that are struggling. A voice for those who have been silenced. The galaxy has been a place of predators and prey for too long. We would like to make it something better. The representative raised a claw, and if we refuse this, gardening. Smile did not waver. You are free to refuse. Humanity will not force anyone to accept our help. We believe in freedom, even the freedom to make mistakes. She paused. But if any empire chooses to harm the innocent, to enslave the weak, to destroy those who cannot fight back, her smile faded completely. Then we will respond, as gardeners respond to weeds, quickly, completely, without mercy. The assembly was silent for a long moment. Then the representative, ancient and strange and silent for so many centuries, rose from his seat. His voice was soft, like wind through dead leaves. We have watched this galaxy for 1,000,000 years, he said. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have seen species promise peace and deliver war. We have never spoken because we never believed anyone would truly change. He looked at with eyes that had seen stars born and die. Perhaps we were waiting for you. One by one, the other representatives stood, not in surrender, not in fear, in something that might have been hope. Later that night, stood alone on an observation deck, looking out at the stars. General stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Do you think we did the right thing? Finally asked. 10 billion dead, 8 billion of theirs, 2 billion of ours, so much death. Considered the question carefully. I think we did the only thing we could, she said. The galaxy forced us to show our teeth. Now perhaps it will listen when we speak of peace. She turned to look at the old general. The weapon is still there. The fleet is still watching. We will always carry that burden now. The knowledge of what we can do, the memory of what we did. Nodded heavily. I dream of Prime sometimes. I see the light. I hear the silence afterward. 8 billion souls gone because I gave an order. And I dream of New Taipei, replied. I see the children who never grew up, the families who never grew old together, 2 billion people who trusted that peace would protect them. She looked back at the stars. We carry both burdens now, the guilt of what we did and the guilt of what was done to us. That is what it means to be human in this galaxy, to remember, to regret, and to keep trying anyway. Somewhere out there, the shockwave from Longinus was still spreading through subspace, not as energy anymore, but as memory. Every species that felt it would remember what humanity had been hiding. Every civilization would tell stories about the day the quiet species roared. And humanity would keep building, keep growing, keep trying to make the galaxy a garden instead of a battlefield. Not because they had forgotten what they were, but because they remembered all too well.